Go ahead and get started.
Okay.
It's pretty quiet and settled. Welcome everyone. I think all of you have been here before, so I don't think I really need to go through my spiel. There's a sign-in sheet hopefully floating around. Please sign it and then pass it along. And so today, proud to present Chih-Chiang Tsou, who's going to talk to us about DIA-Umpire.
Okay. Thank you for everyone to come here, and thank you for having me here. My name is Chih-Chiang Tsou. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in Department of Computational Medicine and Bioinformatics, and I work with Alexei Nesvitsky in his lab and working on mostly mass spectrometry-based proteomics analysis. So this is actually my thesis project that recently there has been a lot of focus about the data independent acquisition. It's kind of a new technology, the mass spectrometry technology that allows us to do more deep proteome analysis. So first, let me give you some a little bit background about what the high-throughput mass spectrometry proteomics. So you have cell or tissue, and it's like a complex sample. Then you fix first you do the GL. You can do the GL separation, or you can do any kind of like this peptide levels or protein level separations, and then you digest protein into peptide. The reason doing that is because mass spectrometry still cannot to analyze like huge molecules, so we need to break protein into like small pieces, like peptide. And once you have the peptide, then you need to go through like the liquid chromatography, we call it LC, like the liquid chromatography, to separate peptide according to the peptide's hydrophobicity. Then you can do another step, like after this peptide level, you can do other peptide level separation, like strong cation exchange, to further to kind of to separate your sample in more detail, and run through the chromatography. And in order for mass spectrometer to detect the molecule, you need to analyze them. So this is the like a most popular step, electron spray ionization, to analyze those peptide molecule, and then those ionized peptide can be detected by mass spectrometer. Then once all the ion peptide goes through the mass spectrometer, the first step the mass spectrometer does is to scan. We call it MS1 scan. It's or called survey scan. So you can imagine in this one MS1 scan, all those peaks represent, each peak represent the possible peptide in your sample at one time point. But the only thing mass spectrometer knows is what's the molecular weight, right? So if you detect like something like here, that maybe 900 Dalton molecule, you don't know what the peptide composition is, because 900 Dalton there may be a lot of different like amino acid composition which can be the 900 Dalton. So in order for us to further to know what the peptide composition, the amino acid composition is, the mass spectrometer can introduce some like neutral gas or high energy gas to break the peptide bond. So once you break peptide bond, then you scan another, we call MS-MS scan, or call tandem mass scan. Then so in this mass scan, then MS-MS scan, you can imagine each peak represent like the small fragment of the peptide. So once we have these two kind of combined together, so first we have this MS1 scan, then we have lot of peak, and then instrument can isolate each, for example, like the 900 Dalton that we mentioned. Then the instrument can isolate the 900 Dalton and allow only 900 Dalton molecule to go through this chamber and then fragment by the higher gas energy. Then at the next step, once we acquire this MS spectra, then we can think this peak represent kind of fingerprint of the 900 Dalton peptide. that we previously observed. So then, let me introduce another high-scale like a kind of data structure. So once we have this MS spectra, so imagine this MS spectra actually is acquired from the one time point of the liquid chromatography. So because the instrument is so fast, then we can think the whole like analysis is like an image. So each time point represent like a one liquid chromatography time that instrument can acquire. So once instrument can acquire a lot of scan, and each scan here, also here the x-axis is time, and y-axis is the mass. So each time point, the one that we just mentioned, this one, the MS1 scan, actually is one time slide of this image. So once we acquire a lot of MS1 scan, then we plot as an image. You can think this is kind of the LC, the liquid chromatography MS mass spectrometer data image, and each point here, each dot here represents a one peptide signal. Then so you can think, okay, there's a one peptide here, and there's another peptide which appear at the same time but at a different mass, and there's another peptide which has the similar molecular weight, but because their hydrophobicity are different, so they elute at a different time point. So we can think this kind of all this dot is kind of the whole peptide population we are going to analyze. So the conventional way to acquire data is called data dependent. The reason being is because the instrument was not fast enough, and because the human protein, or like the whole protein, actually is very, very complex. So once we digest all the protein into peptide, we are looking at probably million possible peptide signal. So an instrument is not fast enough. So we need to kind of compromise to let the instrument to select few things to do the MS spectra. So the conventional way is called data dependent. The way it does is, once we scan the MS1 signal, and then the instrument select like top 20, top 100, the high abundant signal, and then do the MS to acquire their fingerprint spectrum. And then the next cycle, so this scan represent the MS scan, and they acquire the MS spectra from for this molecular weight, and the next scan acquire the MS spectra for another molecular weight, and then once we finish the one cycle, and then do the another MS1 scan and do this cycle and across the whole LC gradient. So you can see here actually, because the way the instrument acquire for the MS spectra is more like a random event, because it's only select like top high abundant peptide signal for the MS spectra. So the one criticism for this type of analysis is, when you do this data dependent acquisition for the same sample for multiple replicate, then you might get different kind of the result, because you cannot guarantee at least this time point the instrument select the top 20 will be the same in the next replicate. So that's the major criticism of the data dependent acquisition. When you do this kind of analysis, the reproducibility between replicate, even the same sample, might not be very, very good. So, and because the instrument, so once you get all those MS spectra, the conventional way to identify those MS spectra is go through the database search. So the way the database search works is, once you have the MS spectra, so you assume, okay, you are analyzing like human protein or mouse protein. So you have all the, because of the genomics, we already have the genomic sequence. So we already have the protein sequence that we expect to see. So you can have the FASTA file, then you have all those MS spectra. So once you have FASTA file, all those protein sequence can kind of in silico digested into all the possible peptide, And all the possible peptide can generate the theoretical spectra according to all the peptide bond you can get. So you have like the theoretical spectra in your database, and you have your experimental spectra. Then the way we identify that is once you have this experimental spectra, we just look for all those theoretical spectra in your database to see which one match, like have the best match to your experimental spectra. And there are a lot of different scoring to kind of estimate. Once you have this spectra, what's the first discovery rate that you say this is that peptide. And once you have those peptide, then you can further infer what the protein in your sample. So these are all the database search that has been developed for this kind of job. So those DDA spectra can search by this database search to identify peptide, and these like TPP, percolator, peptide shaker are the software package to help you to do the statistical analysis to estimate first discovery rate. So once you have that, then you can use this tool to identify what the peptide, what the protein for your data set, and estimate the FDR. And because the instrument right now is getting faster and faster, so people have started to look at whether we can use different strategy to acquire data, not using the data dependent, because it's more like the random acquisition. So the way the data independent works is instead of, so it still do the MS1. So in the MS1, MS scan, you still get the peptide like peak in your spectra. But instead of using like selecting like a top 20 or top 100 high abundant peak for MS spectra, it used the wider isolation window. So previously in data dependent, when you select like 900 Dalton, then you use like a very, very tight window, like a 1 Dalton window to select like the molecule around that 9 Dalton window, and 9 Dalton molecular weight, but the 1 Dalton window, and select that one for the MS spectrum. But here, they use the wider window, for example, like 10 Dalton or 20 Dalton, to allow like a wider range of the molecule to go through the chamber that we just talked about, and fragment all the possible analyze within that mass range. The reason they use this wider window is because they want to scan the full, like they want to use the same isolation window across the whole retention time. So for example, they first do this isolation window, and the next scan, regardless what the peptide in your MS1 scan, they scan another range, and then the third scan, they kind of move the isolation window up to the next range the instrument hasn't scanned. So they do this type of screen like across the whole mass range, and the next cycle it comes back to scan the whole range. So if you do this way consistently and systematically across the whole retention, so you can imagine the differences between this one to the data dependent is here you kind of have the fragment signal for all the peptide in this whole range. But the problem is the challenge here is because you use a wider window, then you have the multiple peptide in the same window, maybe co-fragmented. So the MS spectra is not that specific for one particular ion. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. So this is the way that data independent acquisition works. So the differences between that two type of analysis is here. You can think the peptide ion signal in the LC gradient will look like that, like this peptide route from here, and there's a peak shape. So in the data dependent, it's like just a one snapshot for the whole peak curve, and this MSMA spectral will be searched by the database search. But the data dependent, the data dependent actually, because we use the wider isolation window and across the whole retention time using the standard isolation window. So you can acquire the fragment signal. It's like the same thing like the MS1 signal. So you can also acquire like the peak shape, the like illusion profile for all the fragment. But the challenge, like we mentioned, is here because in data dependent you use a very tight window. So you can more like to be sure this MSMA spectra, all the fragment signal here, all the peak here actually come from this peptide. But here, because you use a wider window, so the link between this peak to this the parent peptide is not that clear. We need to use other computational way to kind of deconvolute to see, okay, this is coming from this one, but this one may be coming from another peptide, which just happen to in a in the similar mass range. Okay. So the conventional way to deal with data independent acquisition data is to use spectral library. So the way they deal with data dependent acquisition is once you have the spectral library which generate from the data dependent acquisition. So if you want to do this analysis, you need to do data dependent acquisition using the same sample, and to go through this type of a strategy to get all the spectra and do the database search. So you have all the like confident peptide identification, and then you build the spectral library from that. And then once you have the spectral, once you have the spectral library, then you first to get the spectral, because spectral library, what spectral library tells you is what is the peptide you expect to see in your data independent experiment, and because you identify them in another experiment, so you know the spectra. Once you know the spectra, you know all the possible, you know all the fragment that you expect to observe. So in this case, in this example, then for this peptide, we expect to see these three fragments, the co-transition. Then you know the fragment signal, what's the molecular, what's the M over Z, what's the molecular weight is. Then you go into DIA data, the data independent acquisition data, to extract the signal like we just described here. And then once you have all those transitions, then you acquire all those illusion profile. Then you can kind of score. So for these three fragments, then you will expect, okay, these three fragments co-elude, like they elude all together at this time point. So it's more likely, okay, this time point, all those signal actually is for that peptide. So you can develop different kind of scoring. So if you have a multiple candidate, how you gonna choose the best candidate? So it's a little bit different from the database search, because database search, the theory of database search is once you have a spectra, you want to find what the peptide which which can expand this spectra. But here is once you have a peptide, then you want to find what in your DIA data, what's the time point represent that peptide. So it's kind of opposite idea. So the targeted this analysis using spectral library. So because they use spectral library, you know what you are looking for. What you know what the peptide ion you are looking for. What you know what the fragment you are looking for. So it reduces the complexity of the computational analysis greatly, and also. And because you need to do the additional analysis to build your spectral library, so you need to spend at least twice amount of sample, and also you need to use a lot of instrument time because you need to do additional experiment. And because when you do multiple that can replicate experiment, and when you build a spectral library from one experiment, you want to find this. Your all the analysis in another experiment, you also need to consider what's the variation between these two experiments. Because when you run the liquid chromatography, you will expect to see like the peptide you do it at a different time point, even with a replicate experiment. And another thing is, once you build the spectral library, you only look for the peptide in your spectral library. So if you cannot find any like novel peptide or new protein in your data independent acquisition experiment. So that's the reason we want to develop DIA-Umpire, which, because we think that all the information we need actually is already in data independent acquisition experiment. We don't need to build a spectral library to find out what the peptide is in your experiment. Essentially, we want to use the database search like the one for data dependent acquisition. So once you have a spectral, you just look at the whole protein on the whole peptide population. What's the peptide? Can explain your spectra. So that's the idea about the DIA-Umpire. So the idea is, once we because we have this kind of signal in the MS1 spectra, and also we have all those signal in MS2 spectra. So the thing we only need to do is how we can connect from the fragment signal to the precursor. Then we can generate like we call this pseudo MS spectra, and which can be searched by database. So this basically the idea. So the way that we do it is we have MS1 data and we have all those MS2 data as different like isolation window. Then in MS1 data, then we develop the feature detection to detect all the dots here, and then reconstruct the peak profile. And then from the MS2 spectra, we detect the fragment signal. So the assumption is, if this fragment signal comes from this precursor peptide signal, then in the liquid chromatography domain, they should coexist together. So basically what we do is we calculate the correlation coefficient for their illusion profile. And then to build this bipartite graph, it's like, okay, we have all those detect precursor and we detect all those fragments. Then we calculate the correlation basically to say, okay, if this one is highly correlated to this precursor, then it's more likely it comes from this precursor. So once we have that, then we can kind of to do some filtering to select for this precursor. There are a lot of fragments. These are 4 fragments highly correlated to this precursor. Then we can generate a pseudo MS spectra, because all those fragments, we know the M over Z, we know the retention of, we know the intensity, like the peak height of the apex here. Then we can generate this pseudo MS spectra. So this pseudo MS spectra it's like this. So we have the precursor. So it's the MS1 signal in MS1 space, and this is all the fragment signal. So you can see all those fragments actually correlate with this precursor. So once we do those signal processing to try to correlate them, then we can generate this kind of pseudo MS spectra. And this MS spectra essentially can be searched by any search engine that develop for the data-dependent acquisition. So essentially, we don't need to have spectral library. Then we can just run through this pipeline for DIA data to generate all those spectra, and then search by this all the existing tool. And we don't need to learn the new tool for that. And also, those identification can be used for other DIA. So these are 3 different tools: OpenSWATH, SpectroNet, and Skyline. These are the tools developed for DIA acquisition. Once you have for the part that you have the spectral library, then you can use those tools to go into your DIA data to do the quantification. Essentially, our identification can be compatible for layer software to do the quantification analysis. And also we develop our own quantification analysis for the into this pipeline. So this is one experiment that we have done. We did 3 different different complexity of the sample. So one is the UPS2. UPS2 is the standard protein. So it's a layer of 48 standard human protein, and it's produced by Sigma. And because we know what are those peptides, what are those protein, so we can compare between DDA, data dependent acquisition, data independent acquisition. For data dependent acquisition, we just run through the workflow that we described. We have the MS spectral, we do the database search. And for DIA, we run through DIA-Umpire to generate pseudo MS spectral and do database search. So here we compare the identification number between these 2 ways.
These are unique peptides?
This is a peptide, unique peptide ion, but it's filtered by 1% false discovery rate. Yeah. So you can see here for a simple experiment that we expect both of them perform equally well. And for E. coli, we can see here still data dependent acquisition get a little bit more protein number, and also for the peptide level number, ion number is roughly similar, and as well as a human data, you can see you will still get a little bit more from data dependent acquisition, a little bit less from data dependent acquisition.
Were these from single runs or multiple?
These 2 bars is 2 different runs. Yeah, so yes, the number here is from single run.
So how much, you don't know how much variability is?
At this point, here we just want to see how many we can identify, and later we have other experiment to see the variation between replicates. Yeah, and also at this point then we know, okay, this pipeline actually works, right? For DIA data, we don't need to have spectral library. We can identify some protein and peptide, but yeah, we get a little bit less compared to the data dependent. And then we compare with the standard DIA tool which uses the spectral library. Then we want to see how far or what's the number compared to this way. So this is so for the protein level, actually we can see all those 3 ways, like DDA, OpenSWATH, and DIA-Umpire actually get a very, very similar number in terms of number of protein identification. And at the peptide ion level, we actually do 2 different comparison. One is when we do the database search, we can specify what's the FASTA file, what's all the protein that we expect to see. And here is we use the whole human proteome to do the database search. And you can see here because we use the whole proteome, we identify more peptide ion compared to OpenSWATH and DDA. But we can see here we still get something that we didn't identify from that can be identified by OpenSWATH here and also DDA. Then we try another way to say, okay, we are not using the whole proteome. We just use the protein sequence which were already identified by data dependent acquisition. So it's more like the targeted analysis that the OpenSWATH usually do, right? You have the spectral library. Essentially, you are looking for only the peptide in your spectral library. So we just want to see whether the search space actually affect the result. So in this way, then we just use the FASTA file, and which contain only the peptide sequence that was identified by the data dependent acquisition. So here we can see once we reduce the search space, then we can get a more the similar result to the data dependent acquisition. So the point to do this one is just say when you search in the huge search space, because there are different peptide populations. So when you do the FDR, the false discovery rate scoring, then it might be more challenging. But when you search like a very like a narrow or tight search space, then you for the first discovery rate analysis, you can get a better result if you compare to this kind of the targeting analysis. And then that the part that we have discussed is for the identification analysis. And here we also want to introduce the way how we do the quantification, and also another way is when we have the multiple experiment, like when you have the 10 replicate experiment, you have the peptide identified in first replicate but not in the second replicate. How are we gonna deal with that? So the way we deal with that is to, when you have the 10 like replicate experiment, then you run through the DIA-Umpire and identify all the peptide for different replicate. Then we can build the internal spectral library to do this targeting analysis. So the way we did this is, for example, here you have 3 DIA file, then you generate the pseudo mass spectra and do the untargeted identification using database search. So you have all those peptides identified. Then you can build an internal spectral library. So here say, okay, you have identified peptide A, B, C, D in your experiment. Then you want to go back to find whether, for example, like a DIA1, it has identified A, B, C, but not D. But here, because we know the D was identified in the third replicate, we can use this spectra to go back to see whether we can kind of recover that identification from the first replicate. So this is the internal spectral library search. Once we do this one, then we can build a scoring and to kind of rescore them and to see whether the peptide D was also considered identified in the first replicate. So doing this way, then you can see we can get like the better coverage for each replicate. So this is the scoring that we do. So for one spectra and score against the one pseudo mass spectra, we can generate a different score.
How do you know it's a better coverage and not larger false positive?
Yeah, so that's the reason we need to do this scoring. So once you have the internal spectral library, then we go back to see whether we can identify them by using a different scoring.
So you did not find a peptide D in your first round.
Yeah. Or we can think that the reason we cannot find D in the first replicate might be just because when we determine what the peptide are identified, we always need to apply some FDR filtering.
Yeah.
So perhaps this peptide D just a little bit below the FDR threshold, because at that time we search against the whole proteome.
And perhaps they are just absent in the sample.
Yeah, that's also possible. So
how do you know it's not absent?
Yeah, so that's the reason we need to do this second step.
Because all you do is you compare with your own result. You didn't compare with any low throughput experiments, and they are not present in any other discovery algorithm.
Here we actually need to do the decoy spectra. So when we do this internal spectral library, we also generate a decoy spectra. So that decoy spectra actually help us to see, okay, when we have this decoy, we do this same kind of scoring, then we can estimate the FDR at the second stage. Yeah. So when we search using this one spectra and to this one pseudo mass spectra, we can calculate different score. So you can see here, this is the score for the identified feature and also the decoy. They have different distribution. So the idea is here we at this point we use LDA, we use linear discriminated analysis to learn the weight between different score, and then to get this whole score distribution. And once we have the targeted score, then we do the initial modeling to expect, okay, this is the distribution of the correct identification, and this is the distribution of the incorrect. So we can estimate the FDR after this this mixture modeling. And so here is the result that we show. So this same as a human cell lysate, we have 2 replicate, and before the targeted restriction only for database, only using database search, then this is like a number of identification that we identify for both replicate. So, but once we do this targeted restriction, we can increase the coverage between these 2 replicate. So essentially, it also like reduce the missing value. So because when we do the proteome analysis, this is just the first step. We get the quantification for all the different protein across the whole different like sample or different condition. And the next step we need to do is to do the differential expression analysis. For that part, we need to reduce the missing value because a lot of statistical thing. If you have a lot of missing value, then you will have a lot of trouble. So and for doing quantification, we also do the peptide and fragment selection. So the reason we need to do that is in DIA, when we do the quantification, we have a lot of information. We have protein information, we have peptide information, we have for all the peptide, we have all the fragment information. So when we do the protein quantification, we can use different strategy to select like the most reproducible fragment for the protein quantification. So here the idea is once for this protein we have a lot of fragment to select from, and we have different conditions, sample 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this shows the for example, this shows the intensity of that fragment across different conditions. So when we have this fragment, then we can easily see A1, A2, B1, C, and C2. They have a similar profile across the different conditions. So they are more like the best fragment to select from for doing quantification. And this fragment B2 and C1 might be just a noise signal in your data. So when we do the protein quantification, we want to fill them out to get the better quantification. So the way that we do that is we score each fragment according to this equation. So this equation simply just the intensity and also the correlation between this fragment to their parent precursor. So when we do the feature detection, we calculate the fragment, the correlation of the elution profile, right? So here we just incorporate that correlation and times the intensity. And for the peptide selection, we just simply use intensity. So basically just select like higher abundant peptide and also higher abundant fragment for our protein quantification. Then there are the different studies actually use the correlation. So once you have this profile, then you can actually calculate the correlation between different fragments and to select a type and select the most reproducible fragment for quantification. So here is the result. We do the few standard protein and spike with the protein with different concentration, and here is the concentration, and here is the quantification. So using this way of the quantification, we can see similar trend that we can kind of monitor their quantification behavior. And then we apply the whole pipeline for the affinity for purification mass spectrometry experiment. So APMS is basically to capture the protein-protein interaction experiment using mass spectrometer. So the way it does is for example, like you want to monitor this EIF4A2, this protein interactome. So you use affinity tag or something to capture that protein, and hope that for other protein interact to this protein will be captured altogether. So when you do quantification, yeah.
What is the output from DIA-Umpire? Is it MCXML?
It's MGA file, so essentially similar to MGSML file. Yeah. So when you want to capture that protein interaction, then you capture the protein of interest. Then hope all those interactive protein will be captured all together. So when you do the quantification, then you hope those interactive protein have the high quantification value. Then, but if you want to monitor the whole a protein-protein network, you need to capture a lot of different protein to build that network. And also you need to do the control experiment. So because there are different the contaminant or non-specific binding. So you need to do the control experiment using different strategy. So we applied DIA-Umpire for this whole pipeline. So if you have different bait experiments or using different protein as bait, and then you run through the whole analysis, DIA-Umpire and database search, and do the quantification, and you also do the scent analysis. So this is the statistical analysis to estimate the probability of that protein is interactor. And so we run through this whole analysis and compare to the result that published by Lambert here. Now, they also use DIA, SWATH DIA experiment, but the way they use is they build a spectral library and then do a quantification. And here we just want to show that using DIA-Umpire, you don't need to use spectral library, but using the whole pipeline, essentially you can get a similar quantification result. So this is the four change they calculate. So this four change means the quantification between the bait experiment versus the control. So if you have the higher four change, that means okay, this protein is more likely to be interactor. So we compare our four change to their four change, and they actually in their paper they say, oh, these are the protein. There has been a lot of annotation in UniProt or a lot of different database showing that those are the protein that is is the interactor for the EIA4A. And so here these are the true interactor, and these are contaminant. So we can see here using DIA-Umpire we can get the similar four change, the quantification value result without using spectral library. And next, that we also extend our pipeline for different instruments, because in the first stage, the DIA was only available for one instrument called Triple 5600. But right now, because it is success, a lot of different companies they also incorporate this DIA strategy. So this is one very very advanced mass spectrometer called OB-Trap. It has a very very high power of the performance. So we just apply the new data to our pipeline to show that okay, here is the two different cell line, HECO 293 and micro tissue liver cell line. Then we compare DDA and DIA. So here, because this mass spectrometer is so powerful, so we can see here using DIA on this mass spectrometer, we get a very very good result. So in terms of the number of peptide identification, we get more in DIA, both for both experiment and also for the protein level. We also get a very very good result, around 3,400 protein identified. Compared to Triple 5600, we only get less than 2,000 protein identified. And also we calculate the identification coverage. So essentially this is how reproducible the experiment is. So we can see DIA also is more reproducible than DDA in this OB-Trap experiment. And then we also slightly modify the mixture modeling. In our previous version, we use the mixture Gaussian to model this distribution. And here we use semi-parametric. So the idea of semi-parametric is because we have decoy distribution. So here shows the U score, the order score that we get, and the gray part, the gray histogram is the decoy distribution. So we have decoy spectrum, and we do the same scoring. So essentially here gives you the kind of random score for your data set that you can get. And this black one is the distribution of all score that we can get. So then we can assume, okay, for all the score here, some of them are correct, some of them are incorrect. Then we can use this grade 1 to model this distribution, and then the rest of the one should be the correct identification. So the way we did is we use the kernel density of this grade 1, and then use the and then put it in the EM model to calculate this probability at different score. And then when we do the MSTAT, which essentially we just put this probability, and then we can estimate this distribution. So once we do that, we can again estimate the FDR. So here is just one comparison between our first version and the second version. So use this new scoring, we expect to see the better, the higher number of applications given the same FDR. So the conclusion of this whole presentation is we have this pipeline is for DIA analysis without using spectral library, and it's not only for one type of DIA analysis, because right now people are trying different DIA analysis using different isolation window or using different hybrid method. So, and this is a Java program and it's open source. And we have the sample data and user manual on this website, and also for the result for OB-track for a new result, and also semi-parametric is in preparation. Yeah, and these are all the collaborators from Singapore, from Toronto, and also from ETH. So thank you then for all the experiment they did, and also for the DIA data they provide us. And with that, thank you. Yeah, I know this a little bit complicated. So yeah, I hope that I kind of present that in a suitable way so you can understand most of it.
Does this accommodate protein modifications at all?
Yes. So when you do database search, you can specify what kind of the modification that you expect to see. Because the way the database search works is you have the spectra, then you know the molecular weight. So you just scan through all the possible peptide fit through the molecular weight. But if you have modification, then you are looking at different molecular weight.
I would expect retention times might change too.
But the database search actually doesn't care about the retention time. But yes, for some like scoring, they actually take the retention time into account. Then yes, modification could greatly affect the retention time. Yes. Yeah.
So I'm curious. So you said that you're looking at sort of correlations in the retention time match.
Yeah.
Are you looking for a certain retention time window within certain interval, or
no? When we do the feature detection, actually we can detect whether the signal start and whether the signal ends. So essentially, that retention time range is detected automatically.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, but what I mean is for different. I guess there's no standard. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But I see your point. So if you compare two signal, one is a little bit longer, one is a bit shorter. Actually, I use the shorter one as kind of overlap region to calculate correlation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.